Welcome back to HFI Covenant. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. I'm bringing you an original piece of human-written work of science fiction, so dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to step into a world beyond imagination. The ion storm didn't announce itself. That was the thing nobody told you about Krios 9. Every briefing Owen Parker had sat through described the moon as atmospherically hostile and thermally extreme. But not one of those briefings had mentioned that the ion storms came sideways, without warning, without the usual electromagnetic preamble that every standard issue sensor suite was calibrated to detect. One moment the sky was the color of a bruise, deep purple and static, and the next, the dropship Harrow was tumbling. Owen remembered the sound more than anything, not the explosion, the sound before it. A high crystalline shriek, like someone dragging a blade across the hull from the outside. And then the collision, a streak of silver and gold punching through the portside engine housing at nearly 300 kilometers per hour. The Harrow and whatever had hit it became briefly, catastrophically, one thing. He came back to himself in pieces. Chest, pain, ribs, at least 2, maybe 3, grinding against each other with every breath like a fistful of broken crockery. His harness had held. His helmet had not. It lay somewhere in the wreckage behind him, cracked down the middle and useless. Owen blinked blood out of his left eye. Head wound shallow, scalp bleeds like a burst pipe. Not a priority, and assessed. The Harrow had come down nose first into a frozen escarpment. What remained of the cockpit was a compressed nightmare of torn metal and sparking conduit, angled sharply so that the emergency exit was now the ceiling. The temperature in the cabin had already dropped 15 degrees. Owen could see his breath. He could see the storm outside through a gash in the hull the size of a man's torso. He catalogued himself efficiently, the way his father had taught him to catalog a broken engine. Start at the top, work down, identify what's critical, ignore what isn't. Head wound, not critical. Ribs, broken, not punctured. Breathing was painful but effective. Left knee, swollen, functional. Right hand. 3 fingers had been pressed against the console during impact. 2 were usable, 1 was not. Equipment. Survival pack, still strapped to his back, miraculously intact. Sidearm holstered. Knife sheathed. Lighter, breast pocket. He was, by any reasonable metric, in appalling shape. By human metric, he was operational. Owen unclipped his harness and dropped to what had been the ceiling, landing in a crouch that sent white fire through his ribs. He breathed through it. 1 breath, 2, 3, the pain became a background frequency, something to be registered and set aside. That was when he smelled the burning, not his ship. Something else. Something outside, close. And then he heard it through the hull gap. A high-pitched structural stress alarm, the kind that foreign ships used. The ones that sounded more like music than machinery. He knew that sound. Every scout in the human expansionary force knew that sound. Void Singer tech. Owen moved to the hull breach and looked out into the storm. The other craft, an interceptor, sleek and tapered like a thrown knife, had come down roughly 40 meters to his left, or what had been his left before gravity rearranged everything. It was burning in the particular clean white way that Void Singer ships burned. Whatever fuel they used reacting with Krios 9's thin oxygen content in a nearly plasma-hot column of white fire. He almost went back inside. Almost. There was movement in the cockpit. A figure, slender, tall, the distinctive elongated proportions of a Void Singer, was slumped against what remained of the canopy, one arm moving weakly, systematically, in a way that suggested not struggle, but simply the body's last-ditch electrical instructions to a system that was shutting down. Owen stood in the storm for 4 seconds. It was, he would later calculate, the most expensive 4 seconds of his year. Then he went. He didn't run. Running on Krios 9's ice-locked surface in a storm would have put him flat on his back in under 10 steps. He moved the way he'd been trained to move in extreme terrain. Low center of gravity, short strides, testing each footfall before committing weight, covering the 40 meters in what felt like an eternity, and probably was. Given that by the time he reached the interceptor, the white fire had climbed to the engine housing directly above the cockpit. The canopy was sealed, Void Singer security, biometric. Owen couldn't open it. He used his knife to find the emergency release, a small universal symbol, even aliens had those, a starburst with a downward arrow, and drove the butt of it against the panel until something clicked, and the canopy hissed and rose 3 inches before the hydraulics gave out. 3 inches was enough for his fingers. He wedged them in, planted his boots against the hull, and pulled. The broken ribs detonated. Owen pulled anyway. Later, he would not be able to fully explain why. Not philosophically. The human explanation was simpler and less dramatic than people assumed. He pulled because stopping would have meant standing in the cold with a dead alien at his feet. And Owen Parker had a deep constitutional, almost geological refusal to let that happen. It was the same stubbornness that had gotten him through the siege of Velka Station, through the Meridian Desert Crossing, through 3 years of the worst postings the expansionary force had to offer. It wasn't heroism. It was something older and less elegant. It was the refusal to be the one who stopped first. The canopy tore free. The figure inside was a woman, if that category applied. And Owen was 60% sure it did based on the physiological profiles in his briefings. She was tall, even folded into the crash position. Gold-toned skin, a mane of purple hair, now matted with something dark. The eyes, when they opened briefly as he grabbed her flight harness, were orange, bioluminescent, like deep-sea creatures, like something that had evolved in the dark. And they looked at him with an expression that would have been unreadable on a human face, but on hers registered somehow, as pure and total disbelief. She said something in Voidsinger. He didn't speak Voidsinger. Yeah, he said, hold on. He got her out. Her body heat, even through her armor, was disturbingly low. The Voidsinger flight suit was designed for vacuum and the regulated interior of a starship, not for a surface temperature of -43 Celsius, with wind chill dropping it further still. She was already cooling. Her metabolism, he'd read about this, had filed it under enemy vulnerabilities, in the dry language of military intelligence, was endothermic in a different way than a mammal's. She didn't generate heat from within with any real efficiency. She absorbed it. And right now, there was no heat to absorb. Owen put her over his shoulder. His ribs made their displeasure known in vivid, anatomical detail. He walked back to the Harrow anyway. The sled was in the emergency locker, folded flat, military-grade composite. He'd used one before on Yenta 4, dragging survey equipment across a glacier. He unfolded it in under 2 minutes, strapped the Voidsinger woman to it with cargo webbing. She was in and out of consciousness, not fighting him, which told him she was worse off than she looked, and loaded it with everything from his survival pack that he could carry. The storm was getting worse. The temperature, according to the wrist gauge on his left arm, was dropping. Owen found his compass in the chest pocket of his survival vest, confirmed the bearing he'd identified during descent, southeast geothermal activity, the survey data had flagged it, and began to pull. The sled weighed, he calculated this as he moved, because his mind needed something to do, approximately 90 kilograms with her on it. He estimated she massed around 70 kilos, give or take, the rest being the sled itself and the survival gear he'd lashed to the front. Add his own 110 kilos of body weight and survival kit. Subtract the reduced gravity of Krios 9, which sat at about 0.8 standard G, and the effective load was still punishing. He walked anyway. The blizzard on Krios 9 was not like snow on Earth, or on any of the colony worlds Owen had served on. The ice crystals were smaller, harder, more like ground glass than anything soft. They didn't fall so much as move horizontally, driven by wind that came off the polar shelf at speeds his instruments logged as 72 kilometers per hour. In these conditions, exposed skin became a liability in under 8 minutes. Owen had his balaclava and goggles. The Voidsinger had nothing but a flight suit rated for vacuum, but not, critically, for wind chill. He stopped, took 2 minutes he didn't have, and rigged his emergency thermal blanket over her like a shroud, tucking the edges under the sled webbing. Then he walked. He'd learned rhythmic breathing in the cold from his grandmother, of all people, a woman who'd grown up in the northern latitudes of a colony world where the heating grid failed 3 times a year. You breathed in for 4 steps and out for 4 steps, and you kept the rhythm even when your body screamed to pant, because panting stole heat. You breathed through your nose to warm the air before it hit your lungs. You kept your shoulders low and your core contracted because your core was your furnace and you needed it working. He breathed in for 4 steps. He breathed out for 4 steps. The storm became white noise. The compass became his entire world, a small, steady needle pointing southeast, indifferent to the chaos around it, doing the one thing it was designed to do. Owen had always found compasses philosophically reassuring. They didn't have opinions about conditions, they just pointed. He was shivering by the second kilometer, hard, full-body shivering, the kind that the military's cold weather training called thermogenesis, involuntary muscle contraction generating internal heat. Most people found shivering distressing. Owen had learned to treat it as his body doing its job. You worried when the shivering stopped. Shivering was life. Shivering was the organism refusing to concede. He shivered and he walked. Behind him, tied to the sled, the void singer woman made a sound occasionally. Not words, something more fundamental. A sound produced by a body trying to negotiate with the cold. Her bioluminescent eyes, when they opened, were dimmer than they'd been at the crash site. He checked her pulse at the 3rd kilometer, stopped, crouched, pressed 2 fingers to her neck, and found it slow and thready, the circulatory system retreating from the extremities to protect the core. She was going into hypothermic shutdown. Not yet, Owen said to her, because he'd found that speaking out loud helped him think, and also because he had a stubborn, irrational belief that talking to people who were losing consciousness was better than not talking to them. We're not there yet. You're going to be fine. You've got probably 45 minutes before fine becomes complicated, and I need 30 of those, so work with me here. She did not respond. He stood up, took the sled rope, and walked. The geothermal survey data he'd memorized during the descent, standard pre-mission protocol, you always memorize the terrain data, had flagged a cave system at the base of a volcanic ridge, approximately 4 kilometers southeast of the crash site. Krios 9 was geologically young, still venting, still hot in its bones. Even when its surface was locked in eternal winter, the caves were steam-warm, mineral-rich, and most importantly, out of the wind. He found the ridge at kilometer 3.8. He found the cave at kilometer 4.1, which meant he'd overshot by 100 meters and had to backtrack, which cost him time and temperature and a degree of personal anguish he did not express, because there was nobody to express it to. The cave entrance was low, he had to duck, and narrow, maybe 1.5 meters wide. The sled didn't fit. Owen unstrapped the void singer from the sled, gathered her in his arms, the ribs again, a fresh symphony of structural complaint, and carried her inside. The temperature difference hit him like a wall. Outside, -43. Inside, approximately 4 degrees Celsius. Warm by the standards of the last 2 hours. The cave was lit by the distant, ruddy glow of geothermal venting, and the air smelled of minerals and sulfur and something biological he couldn't identify. Steam rose from fissures in the rock floor in lazy, continuous plumes. Owen set the void singer woman down on the flattest section of rock he could find, went back for his survival gear, and began to work. The first priority was fire, not because the cave was cold, it wasn't relative to outside, but because the geothermal heat wasn't consistent or controllable, and because his core temperature, after 4 kilometers of storm travel, needed rebuilding. More critically, hers did. He sealed the cave entrance. This took 17 minutes and was deeply unglamorous. He broke ice blocks from the formation at the mouth of the cave, using the butt of his sidearm as a mallet, shaped them roughly with his knife, and stacked them in the entrance gap. Not to make a perfect wall, but to break the wind and create an airlock effect. Cold air still seeped through, but without the wind behind it, the cave's ambient temperature climbed almost immediately. While he worked, he kept talking. It was partly for her benefit and mostly for his own. Ice construction, he said, wedging a block into place. My grandfather would have found this hilarious. Man spent 40 years as a structural engineer building towers out of carbon fiber and smart composite. And here's his grandson building a wall out of frozen water with a pocket knife. The wall took shape. The wind dropped to a murmur. He gathered the driest material from his survival pack, the fire kit, an orange pouch about the size of his fist that contained everything a human needed to generate combustion from friction in suboptimal conditions. Magnesium striker, char cloth, a small bundle of processed tinder. He found additional fuel in the cave itself, mineral deposits that, when scraped, were dry, and a section of wall near the entrance where some kind of dried biological growth, moss, or its Krios 9 equivalent, could be teased away in flakes. The fire took 4 minutes to start. It was a small fire, contained in a natural rock depression that served as a fire pit by geological coincidence. It burned hot and low and filled the cave with the particular smell of char and mineral combustion that Owen associated, at a deep and non-rational level, with safety. Then he turned to her. Her flight suit, for all its vacuum-rated quality, was damp, not wet. The Void Singer materials were hydrophobic, but the temperature differential between the suit and the cave had produced condensation on the inner layer, and damp insulation was compromised insulation. In survival training, this was called the wet paradox. The suit that saved you on the outside was killing you on the inside. It had to come off. Owen studied the Void Singer flight suit with the focused attention of a man who has never encountered a garment with this engineering and needs to reverse engineer it quickly. The fastenings were magnetic. He found that much through experimentation, and the suit was designed in interlocking panels rather than traditional seams, each panel releasing independently when the correct magnetic pressure was applied. It took him 9 minutes and some creativity to get it off. Beneath it, the Void Singer woman wore something closer to a base layer, thin, woven from a material he couldn't identify, and dry. He left that on and covered her instead with the survival blanket, the emergency sleeping bag from his pack, and his own outer jacket, layered in that order. He positioned her close to the fire, on the sleeping mat, and elevated her feet slightly on the rolled survival pack because she had lost so much heat from her extremities that getting the blood moving back toward her core was the mechanical priority. Her skin was the temperature of the stone floor. Her pulse, when he checked again, was there, barely. Owen sat back on his heels, ate 2 survival bars in rapid succession without tasting them, and assessed. She was not out of the woods, not close. The issue with her biology, and he was working from memory here, from briefings that had characterized the Void Singer's thermal physiology in the dry language of tactical advantage, was that passive warming might not be enough. Her core temperature had dropped below the threshold where her body would generate significant internal heat. She needed an external source to prime the pump, so to speak, to push enough warmth into her that her metabolism could remember what warmth was and start producing it again. Owen looked at the fire. He looked at her. He thought about this for less than 30 seconds. Then he pulled off his insulating mid-layer, banked the fire to burn steadily for hours, and lay down beside her, pulling all the layers over both of them. It was not comfortable. He was fairly certain several of his ribs were more broken than he'd initially assessed. He lay there anyway, close enough that his body heat, all that shivering and burning and furious mammalian metabolic refusal, could move by conduction from his body to hers, and he listened to the wind arguing with his ice brick wall, and he waited. He was asleep in under 4 minutes. He did not mean to be. He woke to something cold and sharp against his throat. Owen's eyes opened without the usual disorientation of poor sleep in strange places. A lifetime of fieldwork had cured him of that luxury, and he took in the situation with the particular clarity of a man who is very awake and very aware that he might stop being awake shortly. The Void Singer woman was conscious. She had found the shard at some point while he slept, a piece of her interceptor's hull, about 15 centimeters long, tapered to an accidental edge by the crash, which he'd brought inside because he brought everything potentially useful inside. And she was holding it to his throat with a hand that was shaking, just slightly, with residual cold or adrenaline or both. Her eyes were orange again, dimmer than they'd been at the crash, brighter than the last time he'd checked. The bioluminescence was coming back as her temperature climbed. She was watching him with an expression that mixed fury, confusion, and something he could only describe as offended dignity, as though she had been caught in a position that violated some fundamental principle she held about herself. "What," she said, in accented but very clear standard, "have you done to me?" It wasn't a question. It had the cadence of a question but the weight of an indictment. Owen, who had not moved since opening his eyes, took one slow breath. The shard was sharp. He could feel it, not breaking skin but close enough that any significant motion would change that. His sidearm was 3 feet away. His knife was in his boot, which was on the other side of her. "Warmed you up," he said. She stopped, processed. "You removed my armor. Your suit was retaining moisture. Wet insulation is counterproductive." He paused. "You were dying." Another stop. He could see her working through it, the facts of her situation arriving like geological upheaval, slow and enormous. You carried me, dragged mostly. I had a sled. You. She seemed to be having difficulty with the grammar of what had happened to her. You are human expansionary force. Scout, Owen Parker, yes. I am High Exarch Syrelith of the Void Singer Conclave's 7th Reach. She said it with complete automatic authority, the kind of authority that lived in the bone, that announced itself even when the speaker was wrapped in an emergency sleeping bag and shaking with thermal recovery. You are my enemy. Technically. The shard pressed slightly harder. Then why? Owen looked at the ceiling of the cave for a moment. Steam rose from the floor fissures in the middle distance, quiet and continuous. There's a concept, he said, carefully, in a lot of human cultures. Goes by different names. The version my family used was unlucky guest. The idea is that when someone ends up in your situation through bad luck, storm, shipwreck, wrong place at a very wrong time, the hospitality rules override everything else. Enemy, stranger, whatever. The storm already won. No need to pile on. He paused. The version where I let you freeze and walk away doesn't sit right with me. Silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind was a steady roar against his ice wall. Syrelith lowered the shard. Not immediately, there was a long moment where she seemed to be performing some internal calculus, but she lowered it. She held it in her lap with the grip of someone who needed to be holding something. You should have left me, she said. Probably. It would have been tactically rational. Sure. She looked at him. The orange glow of her eyes was something to get used to, but Owen had dealt with stranger things. You are not distressed, she said, with what sounded like scientific bewilderment. I am holding a weapon. You have broken bones. You have been asleep in sub-zero conditions beside an enemy combatant for... She checked something on a device at her wrist, slim and integrated. 6 hours. Closer to 7, I think. He sat up slowly, and the ribs announced themselves. He kept his face neutral. Are you hungry? I have rations. She stared at him. You need calories, he said. Your metabolism runs on heat input, but it also runs on fuel. Same principle as a fire. He reached past her for the survival pack, moving slowly and without sudden gestures, and pulled out 2 ration bars. He held one out. She took it with the expression of someone accepting an object they believed might be a weapon. The ration bars were objectively terrible. Owen knew this. He'd been eating military survival rations for 11 years, and familiarity had not improved his assessment of them. They were dense, calorie-packed, and tasted like sweetened cardboard that had spent time in a fuel depot. Syrelith ate half of one, stopped, and regarded the remaining portion with an expression of profound skepticism. This is, she said, combustive. Yeah, they're calorie-dense, high-fat content. It tastes as though it would burn. Nutritionally, it does. He finished his own bar and started on a second. Your digestive system should be able to process it. You're carbon-based, oxygen metabolizing. The broad strokes are compatible. She looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize as her recalibrating face. The slight narrowing of the eyes, the subtle tension around the mouth. You know our physiology. I know the basics. It's in the tactical briefings. You study us. Same as you study us, I'd guess. She considered this. Then, with the deliberate precision of someone choosing each word as though selecting a tool. Your body temperature, when I regained consciousness, was significant. Higher than I expected. Humans run hot. I am aware of this in the abstract. She paused. The warmth was... She stopped again, and something crossed her face that was either discomfort or something she didn't have standard vocabulary for. I did not understand the degree of it. Your species generates heat the way our reactors generate power, continuously, without apparent effort. It takes effort, Owen said. Calories, sleep. We have to eat a lot to maintain it. He nodded at the remaining half of her ration bar. That's what that is. Syrelith looked at the bar, and apparently making a decision, ate the rest of it. She did not look happy about it. You spoke of the unlucky guest, she said. This is a cultural law? More of an instinct with a cultural framework built around it. Among the Void Singers, to accept survival assistance from an enemy constitutes a form of debt that can only be discharged by service or death. She said this with complete calm, as though reciting a regulation. I owe you a life debt. Owen looked up from his third ration bar. That's not, I didn't do this to create a debt. The mechanism doesn't require your intent. She tilted her head, studying him. Does this trouble you? A little. Why? He thought about how to explain it. Outside, the storm had dropped in intensity, but not stopped. The ice wall was holding, he could tell by the air temperature in the cave, which had stabilized at something approaching tolerable. The fire was doing its work. Because I didn't save you, so I'd have a claim on you, he said. I saved you because you were cold and dying, and I was there and I could. There's no transaction. He paused. That's the part that's the whole point of the unlucky guess thing. The storm doesn't pick sides, so you don't get to either. Syrelith was quiet for a long time. The cave breathed around them, steam and mineral smell, and the low crackling of the fire. My people, she said finally, would find this incomprehensible. Mine do too sometimes. She looked at him, a long measuring look that felt less like threat assessment now, and more like something genuinely curious. You are a very strange creature, Owen Parker. I've been told. The tectonic shift announced itself at hour 19 with a low, deep vibration that Owen felt in his teeth. Before he heard it, he was on his feet before the first rock fell. Out! He grabbed Syrelith's arm and pulled, which was instinct overriding protocol. She outranked him by a cosmological margin, in her own hierarchy. And she came without resistance, because whatever else Syrelith was, she was not slow. The cave groaned. The fissures in the floor that had been venting steady steam now vented hard, pressurized bursts. And the ceiling, which had been solid black volcanic rock, began to develop an opinion about gravity. The first section came down 4 meters to their left. The second, a slab the size of a transport crate, chose the cave entrance. It didn't seal the entrance completely. It caught on the ice brick wall Owen had built, which was not load-bearing in any engineered sense, but which happened to be wedged at an angle that made it briefly, accidentally structural. The slab sat on it at an angle, creating a gap, maybe 60 centimeters, enough to get through. But it was moving. The ice was compressing under the weight, millimeters at a time, and when it gave, the entrance would close. Owen looked at the slab. He looked at the gap. He thought about the physics. Go, he told Syrelith. Through the gap to the right of the cave mouth. There's a rock shelf about 15 meters out. It'll give you some cover. And you? I'll hold it. Go. She did not move. She was looking at him with that recalibrating expression, more intense than before. You cannot hold that with your hands. Not my hands. He moved to the slab, found the contact point where it met the wall, and positioned himself with his back against the cave wall. His legs bent, the slab's weight transferred through the ice bricks and into his feet. He straightened his legs, and the slab, which had been moving, stopped. It was, from a mechanical standpoint, not complicated. His legs were acting as a hydraulic support. His skeletal structure, the dense, mineral-heavy bones of a species evolved to function in higher G environments than this moon, transferring load directly to the stone floor. The pressure was enormous. His legs were not going to enjoy this. The human skeleton, Syrelith said, not moving, staring at him with those orange eyes, is capable of several 100 kilograms of compressive load, Owen said, through his teeth. I know, I've been tested. Go. You'll release it when I'm clear. That's the plan. Go. She went. She moved the way Owen suspected all void singers moved when they weren't hypothermic. Fast, fluid, economical, through the gap and out into the storm's edge. Owen held the slab for 22 seconds. He counted. Then he released the tension from his legs, stepped to the side, and the slab came down in a controlled cascade that he was mostly clear of, catching his left boot with its edge and producing an impact that sent him stumbling, but not falling. He came out of the cave entrance at a controlled fall into the storm. Syrelith caught him. She was stronger than she looked, which he should have predicted given she was looking at him, a man who'd just held up a rock ceiling, and had probably recalibrated her estimates of biological capability. She had one arm around his chest, and he became momentarily aware that she was warm, really warm. Her core temperature had come back fully, and the heat of her was a shock after the stone. They stood in the storm for a moment, both of them breathing. The cave entrance is sealed, she said. Most of it. He looked at the collapsed section. We can shift that smaller piece on the left. The main chamber should be intact. How can you know? The venting pattern didn't change. The fissures are still active, structures holding. The collapse was just the entrance overhang. He stepped back from her, found his footing, and moved to the smaller rock. "Help me with this." She did. They got the entrance workable again, not the elegant ice brick construction of before, but functional, which was what mattered. Owen rebuilt a windbreak from the fallen rock itself, stacking rough chunks with the pragmatic geometry of someone who has stopped being interested in aesthetics and is interested exclusively in function. Syrelith watched him while he worked. He became aware of this around the time his shirt had soaked through with sweat. The cave was warmer after the tectonic event. The geothermal venting increased, and he pulled his outer layers off to work in his base layer, which was when the watching became more obvious. "Your skin," she said. Owen looked down at himself. Between the cold and the exertion, the fine layer of perspiration on his skin caught the firelight. "What about it?" "You're secreting liquid through your skin. Sweating, cooling mechanism." He hauled another rock into position. "My core temperature was running high from the exertion. The body prioritizes preventing overheating over preventing cold. So it sweats to shed the excess." "You have a cooling mechanism," she said, in the tone of someone discovering that a device they considered simple has a hidden function they find slightly disgusting and deeply impressive. "And a heating mechanism, simultaneously. Thermoregulation." He stopped, because she was looking at the sweat with an expression of genuine scientific fascination that he found slightly uncomfortable. "It's not a spectacle." "I apologize." She didn't look away. "It is. I have read about it in tactical files. Humans sweat. 2 words. It did not prepare me for the efficiency of it. You generated enough heat to keep me alive through the night, and are now so metabolically active that you require external cooling." She paused. "We cannot do this. Void singers don't sweat? We have no need. Our internal temperatures do not range enough to require it." She paused. "Or so I believed." Owen turned to look at her properly. In the firelight, with her temperature fully restored, she looked more as he'd imagined a void singer would. The gold skin, the purple hair, the bioluminescent eyes that functioned like a mood indicator he hadn't asked for. She was watching him with an intensity that had shifted from threat assessment to something more uncomfortable, genuine intellectual interest. "Your scars," she said after a moment. He looked at his forearms, which were visible where he'd rolled up his sleeves to work. 3 major ones: the Velka station evacuation, a crawlway collapse on Dimitrios, and one from something mundane and embarrassing that he never discussed. "Yeah, they record history. Most of them record bad decisions." "No," she leaned forward slightly. "They record survival. Each one is a record of an event that attempted to end you and did not." She paused. "Void singers have no scars. Our biology repairs cleanly. We have no physical archive of near death." She sat back. "I am not certain whether to find this efficient or tragic." Owen pulled his sleeve down. "I'd file it under inconvenient, mostly. You are very uncomfortable with being observed. Most people are. I am not," she said simply. "In my position, being observed is constant. You learn to be impermeable." He looked at her. In the cave's warmth, wearing his emergency sleeping bag like a robe, her hair tangled from the crash and the wind, she looked somewhat less like a Hayek-sark and somewhat more like a person. He figured she knew that and found it uncomfortable. He elected not to say so. "Sleep," he said instead. "We should both sleep. In rotation, I'll take first watch." "Against what threat?" And then from outside the cave, or rather from the narrow darkness toward the back of the cave, where the geothermal venting was deepest, something moved. Frost stalkers, according to the Krios 9 survey data, were ambush predators, pack hunters. They operated by heat signature, which made them simultaneously useful to know about. They hunted warm-blooded prey, and concerning, given that Owen and Syrelith were currently the warmest things for several kilometers in any direction. The pack that had found their cave numbered, as best Owen could count by the sounds and the glimpses of movement at the cave's edge, 5 individuals. He did not reach for his sidearm. Syrelith noticed this. "You have a weapon." "I know. You should use it. 1 gun, 5 predators, enclosed space with rock walls on all sides." He picked up the piece of hull shard she'd held to his throat 6 hours ago and a length of rock he'd been using as a makeshift hammer. "A ricochet in here could kill both of us, or destabilize the structure. And gunfire will flag our position to any sensors, yours or mine, within range." So you're going to drive off 5 apex predators with a piece of scrap metal and a rock. She said this not with fear, but with the pure empirical skepticism of someone watching a plan she is not convinced will work. Persistence hunting, he said. It's a human thing. In the dark, predators rely on what they know. We're going to make them recalculate. He moved toward the back of the cave, where the stalkers were massing, low shadows, the size of large dogs, but built differently, 6-limbed, and the distinctive clicking sound of echolocation. In the dark, away from the fire, what he did over the next 8 minutes was not clean or elegant or dramatic in the way that stories sometimes made these things. It was methodical. He moved through the darkness of the cave's back section, using sound and the dim ruddy glow of the geothermal vents, and he was loud, deliberately, specifically loud. Not in the way of something scared, but in the way of something that was aggressively, bafflingly not scared. He struck the rock walls at intervals. He moved continuously, changing direction, creating a sound profile that to a creature using echolocation suggested something much larger and less predictable than it was. Froststalkers were ambush predators. Ambush predators needed their prey to be stationary, predictable, in a location that suited attack. Owen was none of these things. The first stalker retreated at minute 3, 2 more at minute 6. The last 2 held until minute 8, when Owen moved directly toward them at a pace that suggested, with considerable conviction, that he had no intention of stopping, and they decided that whatever he was more trouble than a meal was worth. He came back to the fire. Syrelith was standing with the hull shard in her hand, watching the back of the cave where he'd disappeared. That, she said slowly, was effective. I was going to say incomprehensible. She looked at him. You made yourself into a threat through behavior alone. You are physically unremarkable by predator standards. Thanks. I mean, you lack natural weapons. Your claws are vestigial. Your teeth are not. I get it. And yet they left. She set the shard down. Because you were unreadable. Because I didn't stop, he said. Most prey stops, or flinches, or retreats. He sat down by the fire and checked his ribs, which had opinions about the last 8 minutes. We stopped evolving away from predators a long time ago and started evolving to be the confusing one in the ecosystem. The one the other predators file under, not worth it. Syrelith sat down across from him, cross-legged, and regarded him with the orange glow of her eyes turned fully on him. You are, she said, not at all what our intelligence suggested you would be. What did your intelligence suggest? Aggressive, territorial, emotionally volatile, prone to violence and crisis. Well, Owen said, 2 out of 4 isn't bad. She looked at him for a moment, and then he wasn't sure if he was reading the expression correctly, given the interstellar cultural gap. She came close to smiling. The relay station was 3 kilometers from the cave, half buried in ice and running on backup power so minimal that its signal was barely a whisper. Owen had known it was there, another piece of survey data filed under potentially useful, but reaching it meant leaving the cave in conditions that had dropped again overnight. Ice crystals in the lungs territory. They went anyway. They went together, which had not been the original plan. Owen had assumed Syrelith would stay and conserve heat. But she had stood up when he stood up and put on her flight suit, which had dried overnight, with a finality that did not invite discussion. He had not invited it. Some discussions resolved themselves. The walk was quieter than Owen expected. They moved in the same direction at the same pace without negotiating it, which told him something about void singers that the tactical briefings hadn't covered. The relay station was a prefab structure, human-built, left over from the original survey mission 3 years prior. Owen got the door open with his emergency override codes and spent 20 minutes bringing the power to minimal operational capacity. The heaters came on. The lights, one of the 3, the other 2 were dead, came on. The communications array was functional. He pulled up the interface and began composing a rescue signal to human expansionary force frequency. Behind him, Syrelith had found the Void Singer equivalent of the communications array, her suit's built-in long-range transmitter, a piece of technology that human tech couldn't match for range, and was looking at it. Owen didn't look up from his own work. He was composing the rescue signal, coordinates, survivor count, medical status, the efficient shorthand of military communication. He was aware, in the way that people who are very practiced at peripheral vision are aware, that she was not transmitting. He finished his signal and sent it. Then he looked up. Syrelith was sitting with her transmitter in her hand, not transmitting, looking at something in the middle distance that wasn't the wall. Owen waited. "If I signal my fleet," she said, "the response protocol for a high Exarch rescue is significant. Multiple vessels. The data they'll collect on approach will include your base's position, the one your signal is going to." She paused. "The fleet has standing orders for human installations in contested sectors." Owen didn't say anything. "I am aware of what those orders are," she said. "I wrote some of them." The relay station hummed around them, wind against the walls, the single working light. "Syrelith," Owen said. "I'm thinking," she said quietly, not sharply. He let her think. He watched the woman who had woken up with a shard at his throat, who had eaten terrible ration bars, and watched him sweat with the focus of a scientist, who had helped him shift rocks in a cave, and been genuinely unable to categorize a human man driving off predators with sound and stubbornness. He watched her sit with the transmitter in her hand and perform some internal reckoning that he suspected was costing her considerably. "Your concept," she said finally, "the unlucky guest. The storm does not pick sides." "Yeah. What happens after the storm?" Owen thought about this. "Usually the guest leaves. Both sides go back to their lives." He paused. "Sometimes things are different after. Sometimes they're not." Syrelith was quiet for another moment. Then she set the transmitter down on the console beside his and did not pick it up again. Her fleet would eventually notice she was missing. They would begin their own search, but not from a signal she sent, not with coordinates she provided, not today. She looked at Owen. "I think," she said, slowly and with precision, "that my people have been missing information about your species, about what you are." She paused. "The tactical files describe a threat profile. They do not describe—" She seemed to search for the word. "The architecture of you, why you do what you do, the internal, the warmth." She said the last word with a meaning that clearly went beyond temperature. "To be fair," Owen said, "we've probably got incomplete files on your end too." "Undoubtedly." She looked at her transmitter. "What I do know is that whatever I thought an unlucky guest was before this moon, it was not this." She paused. "It was not a man who drags his enemy through a blizzard with broken ribs because stopping would not sit right with him." Owen looked at his hands. "You're still my enemy," he said. "Yes," she didn't look away. "And you are mine, and we are still alive, because of a decision you made in a storm when the rational choice was different." She paused. I find it very difficult to simply not account for that." The communications array pinged. His signal had been received. "ETA on rescue craft, 4 hours. He relayed this to her. "My fleet will locate me through my suit's passive beacon within 6 hours, she said. "So we have an overlap." "We have an overlap." They sat in the humming warmth of the relay station, enemy, and waited. The human ship came first, a Javelin-class extraction vessel, 2 crew, circling twice before landing. Standard protocol for a survivor situation, confirming conditions. Owen stepped out of the relay station to wave them down and felt, for the first time in 48 hours, the specific relief of seeing something familiar. Syrelith waited inside. The extraction crew, a young pilot and a medic who immediately began cataloging Owen's broken ribs with professional disapproval, were professionally non-reactive when Owen indicated there was a second survivor who needed extraction assistance. They were significantly more reactive when they registered what species that survivor was. "Scout Parker, she's a non-combatant for purposes of this extraction. Survivor of the same ion storm event." He looked at the medic. "She was hypothermic. She's stable now. Her biology runs on absorbed heat. She should be given access to the thermal blanket and something with caloric density. Don't give her the protein bars. She can't process the whey. Give her the carbohydrate blocks." The medic absorbed this with the expression of someone adding it to a mental file labeled "Today's Surprises," and went inside. The pilot stayed by Owen. "She armed?" "She had a piece of scrap metal. I've got it." He patted his pocket. "She's fine." He went back inside. Syrelith was submitting to the medic's scan with the long-suffering expression of a person who finds medical attention insulting, but is too practical to refuse it. She looked up when Owen came in. "Your people are prompt," she said. "We keep the extraction vessels fueled." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. Outside, he could hear the Void Singer fleets approach, a distinctive harmonic resonance that their ships produced, already audible in the upper atmosphere. 15 minutes, maybe. He reached into his pack and took out the small carving. He'd made it over the last 2 hours of the overnight watch, from a piece of volcanic rock that had been smooth and workable, a small abstract form, round in the middle, angular at the edges, the shape his hands had made when they needed to do something quiet. He handed it to her. She looked at it for a long moment. "What is it?" "A habit," he said. "I carve things when I'm thinking. That's just what came out." "What were you thinking about?" He considered. "Heat distribution, how you hold warmth in something versus how you lose it." He paused. "You, mostly." Syrelith closed her fingers around the carving. She was quiet for a moment, and then she opened her flight suit. She'd repaired the magnetic fastenings through some Void Singer mechanical intuition overnight, and placed it in an interior pocket against her chest. "High Exarch," Owen said. She looked up. "Whatever happens after this," he said carefully, "with the war, with all of it, I want you to know that when I pulled you out of that cockpit, I wasn't thinking about what it would mean. He paused. "I just didn't want you to be cold." Syrelith looked at him for a long moment. The bioluminescent orange of her eyes was steady and full, and if he was reading it right, and he had learned to read a little in 48 hours, something that was the Void Singer equivalent of moved. "I know," she said. "That is precisely why it was so—" She stopped. "We do not have a word for it. Exactly." "We have several," Owen said. "None of them quite fit either." The harmonic resonance overhead intensified, her fleet descending. Syrelith straightened. She became, visibly and completely, the High Exarch, the posture shifting, the authority reoccupying her face like a returning tide. But she looked at him first, before it fully settled in, and what was on her face in that last unguarded moment was something Owen thought he would spend a long time trying to accurately name. "Owen Parker," she said formally, "human scout. I acknowledge the hospitality of the storm. I do not forget." "Neither do I," he said. She walked out into the Krios 9 cold. The Void Singer ship was large and silver and descended with the terrible elegance of a species that had mastered the space between stars. It was beautiful, in the way that very dangerous things often were. The boarding ramp extended. Syrelith walked up it without looking back. Owen stood at the relay station door and watched the ship rise. When it was gone, he became suddenly and completely aware of how much everything hurt. The ribs, the knee, the fingers. The 2 days of sustained, extraordinary effort held together with stubbornness and habit. He leaned against the doorframe and breathed. "Hey," the medic said, appearing at his shoulder with a hypospray. "This'll help with the ribs. You want to tell me how you managed to function with them like that for 48 hours? Slowly," Owen said, and with strong opinions about stopping. The medic administered the hypospray and gave him the expression of someone who was going to be telling this story for years. Owen looked at the sky where the Void Singer ship had been. Already gone, already beyond the storm layer, probably already forming up with the fleet. He thought about orange eyes going dim in the cold. He thought about gold-toned skin that had been the temperature of stone. He thought about a woman who had held a shard to his throat and then, 6 hours later, had helped him shift rocks in a cave and asked him questions about sweat, with the focused attention of someone encountering something genuinely new. He thought about the small carved rock, now warm against her chest from her body heat. He thought, well, the storm on Krios 9 did not pick sides. And sometimes, not always, not enough, but sometimes, neither did the people who survived it. He walked back to the extraction ship. His ribs hurt, his knee hurt, his fingers hurt. He was, by every meaningful measure, completely and stubbornly alive, which was, all things considered, the plan. And that brings